South African environmentalists have added their voices to global concern about the impact of climate change. This follows the release of a report by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on climate change on Monday on the devastating consequences of global warming across the planet. The UN warned that human activity has increased the impact on the atmosphere, the oceans, as well as land, as evidenced by extreme heat waves, rainfall, droughts, and tropical cyclones. In South Africa, environmentalists have issued a strong warning to government not to delay policy plans that will help mitigate against climate change in the country.
This IPCC report paints a stark picture. It gives a stark warning for humankind that we are on a collision course with nature and we don't have a lot of runway left.
Environmental group 350 Africa says the situation is fast becoming dire. This follows the UN's damning report on climate change, which puts the blame on mankind for global warming.
The time to act is now. Mid-century net zero pledges, so pledges to stop emissions from the middle of this century, are not enough. We need to stop burning fossil fuels now.
Professor of climatology at the WITS Global Change Institute says the report has massive implications for the SADC region and the policymakers.
The wonderful outcome of an assessment report is that there is a constant interaction with governments during the course of the period that the report is constructed, and eventually it culminates in a 2-week period during which these 195 governments meet and they jointly agree on the policy relevant statements of the science.
He further adds that the IPCC report should help our policymakers to prepare their position for the UN Climate Negotiations Conference COP26 in November.
Now, South Africa, of course, is also a part and a party to this process. So our government is certainly very much aware of the main policy level, policy relevant findings of the report.
Meanwhile, Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg says not enough is being done to hold world leaders accountable for the climate change crisis. Thunberg says this must be addressed for the sake of humanity and the world. Nozintombi Mia, SABC News.
Well, to talk more about the UN climate reports, we're now joined by Thandile Chinyavanhu, who's with Greenpeace. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme.
Good evening, Peter, and thank you for having me.
So, the word red alert was used by the Secretary General of the United Nations. Is it that serious?
Definitely, there's a lot of strong language that has been used in this report, and it is absolutely accurate. We definitely need to recognize the intensity and severity that climate change poses to our existence and act with swift action.
Break it down for us in broad terms. What is this report telling us and why it's so urgent?
Well, this report confirms a lot of what has already been mainstreamly available in terms of climate research, but it also comes with a lot of new information with regards to climate modeling. But what's most important to draw out from this report from the public, particularly South Africans, is the impact it'll have on our ecology. So specifically on southwestern parts of South Africa, we're likely to see increased levels of drought and arid conditions that may lead to water stress as well as fire conditions. And we've already begun to witness this in Cape Town. As you may recall, in 2017, we reached day zero. Areas in the Karoo have been struggling with water scarcity for quite a period of time. And the issue of concern here as well is that the indigenous flora and fauna in this area, particularly the fynbos, is quite an ecologically diverse area, and this area is threatened as a result of these climate changes that we are likely to see. So some of our national symbols of pride, such as the protea, may potentially be affected in the years to come, and you might possibly see extinction of these species should climate change continue. On the eastern southern side of South Africa, as we've witnessed earlier this year with Cyclone Eloise, we're likely to see increased levels of precipitation on that end, as well as cyclone conditions. And so these are the issues that are most concerning to us right now.
When that drought happened in the Cape Town, they talked about a day zero in terms of actually no water in the taps. Are we getting to a day zero until a point where we cannot fix the climate change story?
Well, this is a very important question that you ask, Peter, because the reality of this report, although the situation is dire, the message is quite clear that if our governments act decisively right now, we can avoid reaching that tipping point of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2030. We definitely, this is not the end. It does not symbolize a death knell for humanity, but rather it's an opportunity for us to recognize the harms and threats ahead and act decisively. So right now is not the time for climate fatalism, but right now is rather the time for action from our government.
Thandile, I was in Durban, 2011, COP17, and the language that I'm hearing now, I heard back then, and that's 10 years ago. Why do you think that we haven't taken it seriously? Because we could have done a lot by now if we had have listened to what was being said at COP17.
Well, the truth is, Peter, that our decision makers have a culture or rather a history of not heeding the warnings of experts. We've seen this with the situation, the dire situation at Eskom. There were warnings as early as 1998. Same with the water crisis that we are seeing in Cape Town. The warnings go as far back as 1990, but there is a culture of ignoring the advice of experts. And the same has been done with the climate catastrophe that we're seeing right now. The language, as you mentioned, is exactly the same. Our decision makers have had access to this science for a long period of time, but they have not acted decisively because they have prioritized the corporations such as Sasol and Eskom and the profit that they have from that. So it's quite important now.
Thandile, are you still there? All right, it looks like we may have lost her. Her picture's frozen there, but I think the message is pretty clear. We're going to try and keep raising her, but let's hope we can get her back because COP17, as I said, 2011, a lot of the messaging that we're hearing now today was shared at that platform. They did subsequently in Paris agree to move forward, but a number of countries, particularly United States in recent years under Donald Trump, not really coming to the party. But it looks as if the new administration, Joe Biden, has started to put America once again on a path in line with the rest of the world. So we're running out of time, and we really do need to demand more from our politicians and our leaders to put this issue on top of the agenda. It's no longer a nice to have. Our planet depends on the right decisions being made. All right, we move on now. International Relations and Cooperation Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor has travelled to Kenya to attend the inaugural South Africa-Kenya Joint Commission of Cooperation meeting to be held on Wednesday. The commission follows the signing of several agreements between the two countries in 2016. International Relations Ministry spokesperson Clayson Monyela says that the JCC provides the opportunity for two nations to complete negotiations of the agreements ahead of President Uhuru Kenyatta's state visit to South Africa later this year.
The JCC will seek to enhance bilateral relations between the two countries, both of which are regional economic powerhouses.
We've got two countries that have got lots in common, be it historically, be it culturally, and all of that. And we think that there are lots and lots of possible areas which we could explore for deepening of our bilateral relations, be it in the economic sphere, be it in the social sphere, be it in the political sphere, but we think there are all kinds of opportunities that exist for exploration by the two countries.
Once the commission is up and running, both countries will also seek to enhance their partnership in fostering peace and stability in the continent. Kenya and South Africa have been involved in peace negotiations in the continent as members of the African Union as well as the UN Security Council.
It's an opportunity for these countries to compare notes, to say to one another, what is your understanding and what is my understanding? How can we help the situation to move forward and so on? That will be part of the ongoing diplomatic consultations between the two ministers.
Later on Wednesday, Dr. Pendo and Kenya's Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Rachel Omamo will meet President Uhuru Kenyatta to brief him on the outcome of the day-long meeting, as well as extend an invitation to Kenyatta for a possible state visit to South Africa later this year. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
Let's return to our story, our top story tonight, and that's the UN report on climate change that was released on Monday, and it paints a pretty dire picture. And helping us unpack that is Thandile Chinyavanhu, who's with Greenpeace. Thandile, thanks for coming back. Just before we lost you, we were talking about political will and the need for that to be urgent and decisive in dealing with this problem once and for all, because you were suggesting we're running out of time.
Definitely, Peter. And as I was mentioning, our government continues to use the low-income individuals that are dependent on the coal economy as an excuse for delaying action, when in reality they are trying to wring out as much of a fiscal benefit from the carbon majors as possible as it stands. So we're hoping that as we approach COP26, that our government will set aside their political agendas and prioritize climate action on their agenda. Something that's quite clear to us is that our government is quite comfortable with the narrative being pushed by international media houses that Africa is a passive player in this climate crisis, when we do in fact have a historical responsibility as far as emissions go, as a result of major carbon majors such as Cecil and Eskom. And it's important that we put forward really ambitious targets to allow for emissions reductions to really take place.
The reality, though, is that the developing nations do need assistance, and the developed nations, who are the biggest polluters, and yet we are the biggest sufferers, need to come to the party as well, don't they, in terms of financing and helping continents like Africa to move from fossil fuels into green fuels?
Definitely, Peter, what we want to see is some good faith from these international actors such as the US as well as the EU that have the financial capacity to assist the global south, but as well as a sharing of information and technology that can allow for us to adapt a lot better. Unfortunately, South African government has not really expressed what we'll do in our capacity as a country financially, what amount of our own funds will we put to adaptation and mitigation. And that is a crucial thing that we need to look at, that South Africa is actually putting forward its best foot as far as capacity is concerned.
So what do we need to do in Glasgow at this climate change gathering?
What we want to see is more ambitious targets from our government with regards to our nationally determined contributions. So the Department of Forest, Fisheries and Environment did open the NDC to public consultation early April this year. And a number of organizations have submitted comments on how they feel the NDCs should look. Greenpeace Africa was one of these organizations, and we submitted analysis that really supported a science-based approach to the NDCs. And we're hopeful that Minister Barbara Creecy will allow for, as October approaches, a final NDC to be submitted that is reflective of this and is reflective of the Paris Agreement as well as what is required by science.
All right, so what can we do in South Africa, in Africa? Because we are hamstrung in the short term for sure. We need energy to drive our economies, and sadly for us, what's available abundantly is fossil fuels. The transition will take time, so what do we do in the interim? Do we have time?
Well, we're fortunate enough that we also have an abundance of sunlight, wind, and a number of other resources that can allow for renewable energy uptake to take place. We're really gifted in that sense as a nation, as opposed to other countries that don't have that luxury. And we really need to see an exploitation of these resources as we go forward. So the 2019 Integrated Resource Plan is actually one of the most crucial elements that has been put forward by the DFFE as a part of its emissions reduction plan. The IRP has a potential of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 84 metric tons of carbon dioxide a year. And that is quite an enormous amount and could definitely have massive implications on our emissions trajectory. So what we want to see is our government prioritizing renewable energy sources and moving away from energy procurement projects that are incompatible with this 1.5 degrees mitigation target. We don't want to see projects that are driven by gas, coal or oil, as we've seen with them trying to procure the Powership deal, as well as the gas amendment bill that we're seeing being discussed right now, as well as the upstream petroleum bill. We definitely want to see more of a focus on projects that are aligned with what we need to do going forward to achieve that 1.5 degrees Celsius target.
Thandile Chinyavanhu, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and let's hope that these messages are not falling on deaf ears, but people do treat it as urgent as the matter really is. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.